शर्म आनी चाहिए हमें। ये पोलियो वाले फिर वापस आ रहे हैं और देखिए ये बेवकूफ नहीं है जो बार बार आते रहते हैं। इनका काम है देश के एक एक बच्चे को दवा पिलाएं। एक बच्चा भी अगर छूट गया तो बीमारी जड़ से नहीं जाएगी।
When this advertisement was released in 2003 by UNICEF, one of the major concerns facing the pulse polio immunization program was the lack of appreciation amongst parents that polio was crippling and there was no cure for it, that it could be avoided by very simple measures, and that the government and other agencies were making massive efforts to bring the solution to the people. All the people had to do was make a minuscule effort to bring their children to the camp where polio drops were being administered. That's it.
That's right. I remember, Sunil, that this ad changed the scenario quite a bit. And in a research conducted post the airing of this ad on television, 90% respondents said the Amitabh Bachchan campaign compelled them to action. Such is the power of advertising or promotion, one of the 4 P's that defines a marketing mix: product, price, place, and promotion. It is perhaps the most persuasive and potent P.
And perhaps the most pestering P as well, Basudha.
That depends on the perspective. And it is precisely this perspective that we shall bring you in the next 25 odd minutes. Perspectives from a host of eminent guests and experts. Perspectives on the 4th P: powerful, potent, persuasive, or preeminently pestering.
Let's first define promotion or advertising. Let's at least attempt it. One of the current and popular definitions of advertising tells us that it is the non-personal communication of information through various media, usually paid for by identified sponsors. It is persuasive in nature about products, services, or ideas designed to influence the purchasing behavior or thought patterns of the audience. That's what a good ad is supposed to do: influence thought.
मेरा नाम मदन सिंह है और जिला बागपत, गांव पखरपुर। पहले साबुन जो है कोई भी इस्तेमाल करते थे, और जो उसके बाद जो टीवी पे जो ऐड देखे हैं, ऐड से लगा के भाई इसमें अच्छी क्वालिटी है। ऐड में दिखाते कि भाई हमने लैब में टेस्ट करके दिखाया, ये सब वॉशिंग पाउडर को फेल करके हमारा अच्छी क्वालिटी का है, तो उससे मन करता, विश्वास करता, खरीदते, इस्तेमाल करते।
We asked a sociologist his view on advertising. Dipankar Gupta, Professor, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Well, I think sociologists' take is probably useful because it has a demystifying influence on what advertising is all about. Because, as you know, advertising, they put the best foot forward, and sometimes there's a lot of dissimulation along the way. And the question, therefore, is, why is advertising necessary? And what are the compulsions behind advertising? I think this is because of the fact that by and large today, most products are somewhat the same. At a certain level, there's very little difference really between X and Y soap. So in order to make the grade, you have to outdo the other at some level. And that is where advertising kicks in and makes for the difference. Because you know, when consumers buy anything, they're paying for the difference.
The crux of what Professor Dipankar Gupta is saying is that advertising makes a brand out of a product, and the consumer is willing to pay the differential between the two.
And post-liberalization, it seems to have become increasingly more important to create that differential. If you were to leave aside the current period of global economic downturn, as the economy of a country strengthens, so does its advertising industry. Dr. Ashok Desai, economist and consulting editor, The Telegraph, concurs.
I think the economy is changing in the right direction, and advertising is simply a reflection of it. And I am quite happy with the direction it is taking. What is most important is the level of competition in the economy. And the more competition there is, the greater the role for advertising. What has happened is that in the last 10 years, we have greatly increased competition in the economy. And that has led to the rise of advertising and to the greater role it has played.
बजे सरगम हर तरफ से गूंज बनकर देश राग देश राग।
What constitutes good advertising? Santosh Desai, MD and CEO at Future Brands, gives a clear, succinct answer.
If you look at advertising campaigns per se, as an element in the overall marketing mix, then I think the role of the advertising campaign is really to connect brands with people. I mean, that's, simply put, is what great campaigns do, is that they provide a terrific point of connection between people, their motivations and needs, and the brand and what it represents and stands for. And powerful campaigns, make this connection in a unique, distinctive way that touch a deep chord with consumers as human beings. I think that's really the hallmark of a truly successful campaign.
Anuja Chauhan, Vice President in J. Walter Thompson Advertising, tells us more on this. In her opinion, it isn't important for advertising to be just good. It is equally important for it to demonstrate that it is effective.
It's never an either-or situation. The best ad that you can possibly make works across both. People play it back to you. People tell you, I really like that ad. People are humming your jingle. People are using your lines. In the headlines of newspapers, it says, Ye dil mange more, and so on. So you really hope to get both. And I know that if you only achieve one, if everyone says, I hated your ad, and you have to tell them, no, but it's really selling the product well, you feel really cheap saying it. And the same thing goes the other way. If somebody says, I loved your ad, but in your mind you know that nothing has sold because of that ad, you still get an empty feeling. The only way you're going to feel creatively totally satisfied as a human being as well as an advertising professional is if both happen together.
But Pappu vote nahi deta. But Pappu doesn't vote, ha.
जी हाँ, पप्पू मत बनिए, वोट जरूर डालिए.
How good or effective has this advertising campaign by the Delhi State Election Commission been? We asked Delhi's Chief Electoral Officer Sadbir Silas Bedi.
In the MCD elections in 2007, the voting percentage was only 43, which was not only irresponsible on part of a metropolitan city and the capital of the nation, but also disturbing as a democratic reference point. So we decided that we will like to tell the people in a way which is unusual that come out and cast your vote. The idea behind the campaign was to turn voting as an activity from not fashionable to fashionable, from not cool to cool. When we compare the figures of last 20 years, in the 2007 MCD election, there were only 43% turnout. But in the 2008 assembly elections, with the same population, the turnout was almost 60%. Now, it may be possible that this is not only the campaign, but other factors also that would have worked. But to a large extent, the media and the other agencies supported the campaign in a manner where it had a very high recall value, which seems to have worked. In the parliament election, we got about from 47 to 53% voting from the last election to this election, which in numbers, when we converted to numbers, in the assembly election, it was 19 lakh more people came out and voted. And in parliament election, again, it was more than 10 to 11 lakh people who came out and voted as compared with the previous election.
The ability to change attitudes across different strata and at a mass level such as this is perhaps the biggest or the most important function of advertising. Loosely called social advertising, one of the regular users of this advertising is the government or government agencies or NGOs.
One of the biggest such movements was sought to be created by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting in the mid-80s, when the need was felt to resurrect the feeling of amity and patriotism and of being an Indian above all. The ministry ran a television commercial that showed eminent personalities from across India running with the Olympic torch, with the notes from our national anthem in the background.
This was followed by a public service message created by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Independence Day on 15th August 1987. 22 years later, people still remember this message.
मिले सुर मेरा तुम्हारा तो सुर बने हमारा.
Another advertising campaign that created a successful mass movement was that launched by the Government of India in May 1988 with the objective of imparting functional literacy to 80 million illiterate persons. The National Literacy Mission was formed to manage this mandate, and the advertising created for this was to deliver a simple and singular message.
I remember that. Each one, teach one.
That's right. Chalo padhaएं, kuch kar dikhaएं. There was an overwhelming response to this advertising, with thousands of people offering their services as voluntary teachers.
One very important aspect related to these public service advertising campaigns was the fact that a professional agency handled them. Eminent advertising professionals believe that that is the key to the success of so important a message, and for the very large sums of money the government spends on them. We spoke to one such eminent professional who was in fact very closely associated with these pieces of communication, and especially the one created for the National Literacy Mission. Rhoda Mehta, strategic marketing consultant and one of the topmost media professionals in the country.
Social marketing demands far greater skills and efforts on part of professionals, because you are not just dealing with physical products, but you're dealing with people's lives. And therefore, if your research, your understanding, your strategizing, your planning and your execution is not finely tuned, you will never get the kind of communication that will move hearts and minds in terms of what you want them to do to help achieve a better standard of life or for the betterment of society. Therefore, it is really a question of who is used. I mean, it's like using the best mind for whatever you need to do. For example, a lot of this communication we see from public sector units or from ministries promoting what they have done is very, very poorly executed.
While social advertising or public service advertising has a clear and desirable role in effecting attitudinal changes, can one say the same when one comes to products, services or ideas sold by the private sector? Is the private sector truthful and beyond reproach?
H.G. Wells very famously said once, "Advertising is legalized lying." Let's find out what an advertising professional has to say about this. Mani Jairam, Vice President Creative with Euro RSCG Advertising, offers his very candid viewpoint.
See, I think that, yes, being an advertising professional, I think we are lying. Simply because when I'm talking about a product in a particular advertisement, I have to glorify it to sell it. Because the consumer, mind you, whether he's watching the television or reading a newspaper or a magazine or whatever it is, at that point in time I have to catch him, given the plethora of news that he's facing, the sports news, the politics and this and that. So I have to nail him there. I have to catch his attention there. So unless I do something more to the product, I will not be catching his attention. For example, you take a product like a hair oil. What happens is, if I don't glorify, or don't lie rather, that this oil is going to do this to you, that to you, the boys will start looking at you, you'll get married, this and so on and so forth, the woman is not going to look at you. If I'm going to plainly put it in a very placid way, that this oil is good for your hair, it doesn't cut ice.
Advertising projecting tall claims can be censured by either the government or by self-regulatory bodies such as the Advertising Standards Council of India. But then, there are enough examples where such censure has either not been effected or pursued.
In a scenario where advertising assumes that important role in shaping opinion, the issue of ethics in advertising becomes significant. Consider the skin whitening creams category. According to one estimate, they are the largest selling creams in Asia. We asked Kiran Mishra, an employee in a media organization, her opinion of this category.
What I'm hating about these advertisements is that they show a very depressed, dejected, downcast woman who has not been able to make it big in life because she is not fair. And then these skin whitening creams promise that they'll give her a fair complexion in 15 days and she will clear her interviews and she'll be on top of the world. But somebody who is born inherently with a dark skin and giving them false promises, I feel that the Indian Medical Association should come out with a clear public statement on this. Some noted dermatologists and skin specialists should morally take up the responsibility of educating the public on this, that what is the factor that constitutes your skin color, what is it that external creams can do, and what is it that they can't do. Equating fair with something positive, that is ridiculous. These advertisements of fairness creams should be immediately banned.
Vandana Das, Senior Vice President Ogilvy Mather Advertising, touched upon the age-old debate in this context, or whether in this case advertising is merely echoing the needs of the consumer, or is it creating a need where none has existed.
See, what you see is actually a reflection of the societal trends. Like obviously advertising is one of the influencers. Even if you actually look at all the, say, beauty pageants which are really rampant today, you will notice that except for a case in the US, all of them are fair. Or even if you look at our Bollywood movies, they all show that all the actresses are fair, and or someone who's dark really doesn't, make it to a given cadre or something like that. So it is reflection of the societal trends.
A much wider debate is to do with the role of advertising vis-à-vis societal changes. Which leads, which follows? Is one the cause and the other the effect? Here's what Piyush Pandey, Executive Chairman and National Creative Director of Ogilvy and Mather, has to say on this issue.
The role of advertising is not just to capture what's happening on the surface, but to kind of help things which are just below the surface to come out. And the best example of that is the chocolates campaign that happened in 1994 when the girl danced for the cricket field. It suddenly gave people a license that if there's a child within me, don't hesitate to express it. It actually helped something which was within us, but we were not practicing it openly, and it changed the market completely. So I think the role of advertising is both to reflect society and to change society in whatever little fashion that you can do.
For an issue as important as this, it is critical to get a point of view from a person completely outside this industry. So we spoke to sociologist Dr. Shiv Vishwanathan.
Basically, advertising itself is a reflection of the power interests of a society. So if you expect it to change beyond a point, it doesn't. But as advertising becomes part of the folklore of a society, becomes a part of the desires and fantasies of a society, it does affect change. In fact, it demands change. And in that sense, it has a very strange interaction with the value systems of the society. It shapes desire and therefore creates values. But at the same time, it does not create overall value frameworks. It only creates fragments of them. And it creates fragments of them as desire and fantasy.
We probed Dr. Shiv Vishwanathan a little bit more on this subject, alluding specifically to advertising's influence on the Indian ethos, culture, civilization and heritage.
If we were to take India in terms of its heritage, its civilization, its culture, advertising will find it very difficult to impact these things. But if you take India as a market and a nation state, they have different axioms. And as a market and a nation state which tries to create the modern middle class, the modern middle class is very susceptible to advertising, because especially when there are no isms to control it. When there was a socialist imagination, the middle class to a certain extent was impervious to advertising. In fact, advertising itself fell within a socialist kind of imagination. But today, with the market and the middle class combining within the idea of the nation state, I think advertising has become a very potent force. It is changing values. In fact, to a certain extent, is defining the standard images of the middle class as much more individualistic, much more mobile, not so much in search of justice, but in terms of opportunity. So in that sense, advertising is creating deep fissures in the idea of the Indian we had earlier.
The fact that there is a ban on some categories of products from advertising is proof enough that advertising does have the power to change very large sections of society. Otherwise, the ban would be meaningless. In this context, Professor Dipankar Gupta talks about cigarette and liquor advertising in India.
Cigarette advert is misleading because it gives the impression that if you smoke cigarettes, you'll be a real man. You see, you'll run faster, you'll ride horses better, and women will love you, and so on and so forth. But that is really complete opposite. I mean, you can't run fast. In fact, your energy levels are low. Everything, your body doesn't function well, and moreover, it leads to all kinds of other major heart and other cardiovascular problems. But none of this is really mentioned in advertising in cigarettes. Likewise with liquor. You see, they just show the good times, but they don't talk about the bad times. They don't talk about the ill influence these things have on you. So all advertising actually tends to shave off the truth in a certain direction, and point the whole phenomenon of the product in a different direction, which is very glamorous and very, good to look at and so forth.
The answer, therefore, is government intervention, as has indeed happened in tobacco and liquor advertising in India. But is that the right answer? In the opinion of our economist, Dr. Ashok Desai, it doesn't work.
I am entirely against these advertising bans. They are completely misplaced. If you think that tobacco is bad or liquor is bad, then you ban them. There is no point in allowing their sales and then banning the advertising. I think their advertising is some of the most creative, and it should be allowed.
The treatment of women in advertising has been a much debated subject. Many feel that she's exploited and debased in advertising, and cliches that aren't complimentary to women or womanhood are constantly perpetuated by advertising. As an advertising professional, as a creative person, and as a woman, Anuja Chauhan feels that isn't strictly true anymore.
See, all ads that are aimed at men, basically. If you have a big fancy car man, you're going to meet a hot chick and she's going to fall in love with you. That is what the ads say to the men. And the ads to the men say things like, if you use certain so-and-so deodorant, girls are going to fall all over you. Somehow nobody seems to mind that. And that's exactly that's the same thing they do for the women. They say, if you use so-and-so cream, then men will fall all over you. It's the same thing. But somehow, maybe it's a lobby that is very touchy, which is, I don't know, maybe the women's rights lobby or whatever. Because the ads, some of the ads that talk to men are completely insulting. They're like saying, use this scent and women will be in love with you. That's a fairly insulting thing to say to someone, It is saying that nothing else matters. So I really think that it's disgraceful the way they portray both sexes.
Hey, business news देखना है.
Very dangerous.
Dangerous?
Bombay Stock Exchange, Sensex, ting! आपकी सांस. Business news.
For those who remember this ad, it is significant to note that this ad shows the girl child and not little boy. This is a major shift in the advertising industry's attitude towards the girl child. Whereas at one time, advertising only showed the male child, be it for energy and food drinks or a candy, increasingly we can see little girls as the center of attention in ads.
Rhoda Mehta recalls her experience at effecting this change as far back as 1976 for a campaign for the Indian Cancer Society.
There was also the need for us to run some editorial and educational material by the then head of the organization called Dr. Jaswala, a very famous doctor. And the issue was, who do we use in the visuals? And clearly there was a reluctance of normal models to participate in this campaign visually. And so we eventually looked at taking children who were the ones who suffered the most if their parents did not detect their illness early enough. And that is the first time that I recall, as far back as I can go, that we used a little girl as the visual messenger of the educational message that Dr. Jaswala was to say in the advertising. So that was the first time that we began, at least I became conscious about using children as a vehicle of promoting a social message.
देखो इन्हें ये है ओस की बूंदें.
Prasoon Joshi, Executive Chairman, McCann World Group India, has written some very sensitive lyrics for a recent film dealing with differently abled children. We asked him if it was appropriate to use children in advertising.
Films have used children, stories have used children, plays use children. So it's not that children can be completely cut off from advertising. But I think we should have a sensitive portrayal of children, and should be more responsible towards it. And I think most of the responsible advertising practitioners are very, very careful about that.
We also asked Prasoon Joshi if he thought it was all right for advertising to directly target children with their products.
Why not? There is a product which is sold for children, like a candy or ice cream or things which children love. After all, they consume it, and there is nothing wrong with consumption of those products. Then I don't see any harm in luring children and saying that my product is better than other products.
We are not saying that the private sector is not a responsible corporate citizen, even though corporate social responsibility has a long way to go in India. Some efforts are being made by the private sector that are laudable
and very visible. Mr. S.Y. Qureshi, Election Commissioner of India, gives a recent example of such an effort by the private sector.
We have recently seen a trend that commercial products are using social messages in addition to advertising the product without any additional cost. For instance, you have seen an advertisement about a tea which talked of voter education, and in a way voter education message was piggybacking on a commercial message at no extra cost, and in the process both benefited. The commercial product also got noticed more than extra, and social message went across for free. In India, unfortunately, corporate social responsibility is extremely low, very poor. We don't come across Warren Buffett kind of people. Instead of setting up his own foundation for $28 billion, he could have set up 28 foundations, but he rather gave it to Bill and Melinda Foundation. But in India, we don't have that kind of thing. So in that scenario, at least this smart device of piggybacking social message on a commercial product is something which companies can follow. And I've noticed that 2-3 other brands also of other products, they are using this technique.
खैर चलिए हर सुबह सिर्फ उठो मत.
So, it is really a mixed bag. Whether we use advertising as a powerful tool to shape opinions that makes the world a more enjoyable place at the individual level or at a collective level, or we use it irresponsibly so that it is not persuasion but pestering, the choice is really ours.
But one thing is certain, advertising impacts all of us. The famous sign-off of a major soft drink manufacturer, Ye Dil Mange More, were also the words uttered by Paramveer Chakra awardee, the late Captain Vikram Batra, to his commanding officer after capturing a vital peak in the 1999 Kargil War after a bitter and hard-fought battle. This is the power of advertising. And that power is ours to use or misuse.